Welcome to The People's View, a program dedicated to discussing local, state, and national issues and their effect on the American people. The People's View provides a platform for state representatives and national figures to present their viewpoint. Whether it's social, economic, or financial topics, you'll hear it on The People's View.
Well, hello, this is Carl Seidel with The People's View. Pete Silva, our co-host, is not available today, but we have our Speaker of our House, Speaker William OBrien. Welcome, Bill.
Oh, thank you for having me here, Carl. I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you.
Good. Well, what we wanted to do for our audience here in Nashville, and actually throughout the state, Bill, is to find out, get some opinion from you, how well we did in 2011 and what's ahead in 2012.
Sure. You know, obviously big subjects, and you know, clearly I think we've accomplished some fairly great things the first half of the year. You know, this was a year of having to deal with a substantial budget deficit, a structural deficit, and it was a result of several things. One of them was that the federal stimulus money was gone, you know, somewhere around $500 to $600 million. Figure I've heard is $563 million, and federal funds were gone. A second problem that had to be solved is that we had been traditionally overestimating revenues to the tune of, according to the Pew Center for the States, 12%. A budget for 3 or 4 budgets. We were in the bottom of the country. I think we're in the bottom 3 of all states in the country in overestimating revenues. So, you know, that is, in a sense, a problem that had to be solved. We had to stop doing that. We had developed a practice of borrowing money to pay operating costs. And if we were going to stop that, and we said we were going to stop that, then that's also essentially a deficit that had to be covered. And then we had a commitment we had to keep. And the commitment we made when we took the majority to the people of New Hampshire is that after 100+ increase in new taxes and fees, we weren't going to raise taxes and fees this cycle. We were going to live within our means. That meant we had to tighten our belts. We had to come up with a budget that was substantially reduced. We had to make some choices. You know, so often when you're spending other people's money, and let's face it, that's what government does, it's easy not to make the choices. And we had to. We had to cut in areas that we probably would have liked to put more money into it. And the result was, after a lot of hard work, you know, we had 50 to 60 representatives who were working on Ways and Means and the Finance Committee, in some cases 7 days a week, going through budgets, looking at revenue estimates, talking to economists. We put in place a budget with the assistance of the Senate that was substantially reduced, but a budget that meets the core functions of government and also meets, I think, what we define and all of us would want to achieve, which is a level of decency with people who have become dependent on government services.
Well, I know that the committee's working hard. We have a couple of new reps here in Nashua that were on the Ways and Means and on Finance, and they did put in a lot of effort, and I think we did a good job as a overall. I mean, we really looked into it and made people answer questions that they haven't answered before.
Well, that's right. That's right. And we put in place a process that we want to continue now for a few budgets where we're asking the question, what is a core function? And how can you achieve this core function with more efficiency? And what is a nice thing to do but not a desirable thing to do? And most importantly, Carl, and I think this is where we as Republicans often differ from the Democrats, because Democrats are decent people, obviously. They want to achieve good for their neighbors, but they don't ask that question, which is, where is this going to lead? If we institute this program that accommodates or addresses this problem in our society, is it going to promote that problem? If you accommodate a problem, sometimes it promotes it. Where is this going to lead? And we're starting to ask those questions.
And you're asking the question is, are the programs doing what they were set out to do? Because sometimes they get off track.
Well, that's right, and we all have examples of that. I know one example I looked into with Representative Steve Stepanek, who's chairman of Ways and Means that she had come across some job training programs that if you looked at the programs, they, well, this is good. They're teaching folks how to put together resumes, how to use computers, and so forth. And then you look a little deeper, and the folks are saying, well, I have to go here to stay on welfare. And we asked the program directors, well, is there any follow-up? Are you seeing if these people are actually getting jobs? No, we have no idea. And you talk to the folks in the program, and they say, well, no, I have no intention of doing anything other than checking off this item to make sure that the welfare payments continue. And so, you know, good programs that I think have to be looked at in terms of performance measurements, and are we getting where we want to on these, or are we just sort of spinning our wheels with the assumption that good results will come from it?
I know one instance that I can recall listening into a report on the audit committees that we have to audit the function of all our committees. And when they come up with business-like comments about how they could correct, how the agency could correct their operation, they didn't seem to be listening before. But now I guess they're listening a little bit more.
I think they are listening. They realize that we're serious. They realize that in the end we're not going to paper over the problems. In the end, we've changed the way we do budgeting in the state, in Concord. And you know, that's another commitment that we had made to the people of New Hampshire, is that we were going to budget like we budget at home. Now we hear that so often, and you know, I'm relatively new at this. I'm in my third term. You're in your second term, and so I think we're fresh enough here that we assume that these words have meaning. So when we came up there, we said, well, how do you budget for your home? And what you do is you say, oh, how much money is going to be coming in? And you say, I better not spend more money than that. If I do, if I'm taking out my credit card to pay my mortgage, I'm taking out my credit card to come up with money that I know is not going to be covered by a paycheck, then I'm in trouble. And so we decided, in order to institute that on the state level, we were going to change the direction of budgeting. Rather than figure out how much we're going to spend and then turning to the Ways and Means Committee and say, could you please find the money? And that led to the overestimating of revenue. It led to the new taxes, new fees. We instead went to the Ways and Means Committee and said, look at the existing tax structure. How much money will that bring in? And you know, they talked with the agencies, and they put the agencies' feet to the fire, and they talked with the economists, and came up with an estimate that's remarkably accurate. It's playing out very well. It was a little over 300 million less a year than Governor Lynch's, which, by the way, is about 12%, you know, overestimated, as it turns out, not surprising. But we took those estimates, and then we went to the House floor, and we passed a resolution committing to the people of New Hampshire that we will not spend more money than that. And if there's more money that comes in, we'll put it into rainy day fund, we'll reduce taxes. Yeah. And even with that, we've been able to, living with our means, look at a few taxes that we have been able to reduce, you know, such as the motor vehicle registration surcharge.
Yeah, yeah. And I think both of us come from a business background too, and we have experience handling large groups of people, large different agencies with different purposes. So I think that has helped out too, bringing that perspective to the operation.
Well, that's right. I mean, because if you've been in business or if you run your home finances, you know that you live in a world of limitations. You can really run out of money. And you know, if you're running a business, I've been brought into businesses as an attorney and actually given the responsibility to run them where you know, they were running out of money, and you have to sit there and say, okay, how do we make this last? How do we save this business? Unfortunately, in government, we've developed a certain laziness that says, you know, if we run out of money, we increase taxes. and
or
you know,
whatever.
And that's not good. It's not good, more, you know, because you're taking money from people, and just in and of itself, if you're not running your business well, the business government well, you shouldn't go to people for more money. But most importantly, it wasn't keeping our commitment for what the people of New Hampshire wanted, which is a government that is affordable so that jobs can return to New Hampshire. If we have a government that is going into the economy, taking too much money out of the economy, that is regulating too heavily, that isn't regulating smartly, you're going to have a state economy that's not going to be robust. You know, we obviously lived in a nation of 50 states. We have economic headwinds that are national and international in nature. but we knew we could do better in New Hampshire in putting together a business environment. I think we've done that.
Well, I think your approach, too, in trying to make the state a better, more attractive for businesses is the way to go. We can increase the tax base without increasing the tax rate.
We sure can, and I think that's something that unfortunately some people don't pick up on. You know, that you can reduce taxes and in the end get more tax revenue because there's going to be more business activity. And we see it now. You know, part of the criticism has been, as we put together the budget, is that you're killing jobs, and jobs to them were, you know, government employment. And look at what has happened, Carl. We've gone from when we were elected as a majority, 5.7% unemployment. Not bad, but not great, certainly for those who are out of work. We've gone down to 5.1%. Now, that's good in and of itself, but the great story there, the story that we're really proud of, is that's in an increasing workforce. Unlike on the national scene, where we went recently from a 9% unemployment rate to an 8.6%, and we did it because over 300,000 people just dropped out of the workforce. We weren't employing any more people. They just dropped out of the workforce. The workforce in New Hampshire is growing now. We've produced 6,800 new private sector jobs, and they've been produced in sectors across the economy, including in the health and education sector. I know that some of the hospitals are saying that they had to lay off workers, but the statistics show that there's 1,700 more health and education workers employed in New Hampshire than when we went and took the majority in Concord.
I know that there was a big increase in that, and I'm glad to see that you have that statistic. But let me ask one other question along the line of what's ahead now for 2012. As we go on, we had no surplus funds left, no rainy day fund left. We have a situation where the economy hasn't really filled out as well as we'd like, but it has increased. But we still look at the future with some indecision because of outside influences more than inside.
Well, sure. We see the debt crisis in Europe. We see a slowing Chinese economy. We see a U.S. economy that is subject to a national government that really can't get its budgetary affairs in order, which creates quite a bit of uncertainty. We see the uncertainty that employers have with Obamacare. What is this going to mean in terms of future fines, future costs, and so forth? But, you know, in New Hampshire, we can do what we can, and we can do quite a bit to make New Hampshire a strong economy. You mentioned the rainy day fund. We made a choice when we put together the budget, and the choice was not to put money into the rainy day fund. And the reason we made that choice is because we knew it was a substantial cutback. The state-funded portion of the budget, we cut back 17.6%. We went from, and it's a real cutback. It isn't a Washington cutback where we say, you know, we're going to spend trillions more. Oh, we took 17% out of that trillions more we're going to spend. This is a reduction of 17.6% from the last budget, real money. So we knew that that was going to take those people who have come to expect and depend on government and ask them to turn to themselves. It was going to challenge those expectations and dependencies. And if we're going to do that, we couldn't leave money in the rainy day fund. We had to be able to say to people, as we can now accurately, we've spent all the money. It's all spent. So if you want another program funded, or a program funded to a greater degree, if you want more money to go to UNH, if you want money to go into the CHINS program, Children in Need of Services, then you have to tell us where you're going to get the money. What other program is it going to come out of? What tax are you going to put in place? And without that kind of conversation, which we couldn't have if we were in the rainy day fund, then it's going to be difficult to explain the budget to the people in New Hampshire. In the future, we do have to. And good budgeting says that you should have about 4 to 5% of your annual receipts in a rainy day fund. And the reason for that, if nothing more, is that when you have to borrow money to put up bridges and highways and schools, the underwriters in New York say, well, is there a buffer there? If things turn around, are they going to have enough money to pay that? And that really goes to your bond rating. New Hampshire has a fairly good bond rating. With Standard & Poor's, I think we're a AA+. I'd like it to get it up to AAA. There are states out there that are AAA. There's no reason New Hampshire shouldn't be. So we're going to move forward in the future to get money in the rainy day fund and so forth. But right now, there are challenges. You know, one of the challenges is the tax called the Medicaid enhancement tax. The receipts under it are less than the governor had told us they'd be, less than we anticipated they would be, to the tune at this point of about net of $57 million, I think it is. We'll see. You know, the commissioner of revenue tells the revenue administration tells us that it's going to pick up. This is hospitals getting used to new rules for Medicaid enhancement tax calculation, and it'll pick up. We'll see. In addition, there was a problem back in 2004, 2003, the way we were calculating reimbursement for Medicare from the federal government. Some of your viewers have probably heard the term Metascam. Well, they viewed it as Metascam, and the end result of some litigation that's been going on for the last 4 or 5 years is that the governor has entered into a settlement with the Medicare people, the Center for Medicaid Services, federal agency, that's going to take another $27 million this year to pay it off. And so we're dealing with some of those. You know, we're going to look carefully at what revenues are coming in, and then we might have to go back to the budget and open it up and say, where can we achieve some savings?
Okay, so that's one of the things you're looking forward to? Is
well, it's one of the things that we're going to certainly have to deal with this upcoming session. Wow. Other areas that we're looking in, I think, that are more positive is that we're going to continue to extend the regulatory reform that we have started now. We passed, as you know, 43 different bills that in big ways and small reduce regulations in New Hampshire. You know, one of my favorite is the bill that one of the senators from Nashua put in, and it's just a great idea. It's the type of thing that I want to see us do more of. I think it was Senator Luther put it in. And this is a bill that told the Department of Labor that when you go into a business and you find a technical violation of labor or employment laws, you know, maybe a poster wasn't up, or they look into a file and a piece of paper isn't there, something having nothing to do with health and safety or anything of that nature, that before you fine, warn, and then come back in 30 days, because the Department of Labor was going in there and trying to find technical violations. You know, your fire extinguisher should be, you know, 2 feet off the floor, not 1.5 feet off the floor. And rather than going and working with business as a partner to achieve regulatory compliance, they were going in there as an adversary, trying to get money out of these businesses. So we put that law in place. They have to give 30 days warning. Warning means educate, and then they can go back, and everybody wins at that point.
I agree with you. I think that's one of the things I heard in going around to businesses that I've visited over the last couple of years. That's one of the reasons I ran for office, too, is because I didn't think we were as business friendly. There were lots of rules and regulations. You sometimes wondered whether that was just another way of getting more money to put in the pot.
Well, I mean, you look at, I think, what is an open secret, and surprised me when I encountered it, probably you as well, is that there's some agencies up there, the Department of Labor is one of them, that live off the fees and fines they collect. And so yeah, that puts the wrong incentives in place. Right. This ameliorates the effect of a symptom, but we're looking at the problem, and the problem we're looking at there is bringing these agencies back into the general fund so that they compete with any other agency for funds, and we don't incentivize them to go fine or increase their fees in order to get enough money to live.
Sure. Well, as you know, I'm on the commission to look at these rules and regulations, and one of the silliest things that I saw that I couldn't understand how anybody with any kind of logical approach to this problem could live with it. The Department of Labor has a definition of independent contractor with 12 conditions that the person has to meet, in order to be declared an independent contractor. Even if that's not enough, the other agencies don't use that definition. We have agencies up there that use different definitions for the same problem. And you can't have that in any kind of business.
Yeah, and in and of itself, it's absurd. But, you know, Carl, what we're trying to do here is to make sure that we have a business environment that produces jobs for our neighbors. And in that kind of business environment, businesses are going to withdraw.
Yeah.
You know, they're going to say, you know, if I'm going to create a new division, do I create it in New Hampshire? Or they may just be a small business that'll stay here, but say, you know, I'm just not going to hire. I'm not going to, you know, maybe get an independent contractor. And that means that somebody, one of our neighbors, doesn't get work. And so we just have to be a lot smarter about it.
Well, one of the areas that I was very pleased with this time compared to my first term is when we addressed the capital budget. And the community colleges really did a good job this last term in coming together with a 4-year plan that was well thought out, some of it self-financed, that we were able to give it almost everything they asked for because they were going out and looking at companies who needed training. Right. And certain special skills were where they were focusing their expansion. Right. And so they got, you know, they had a plan, they implemented a plan, and it's filling some of the needs, which will help us.
We get a great bang for our buck from the community colleges. I mean, that's one of the areas that I personally, as I looked at agencies and where we could put money, was really disappointed that we just didn't have more funding this cycle to give to them, because they do a great job for our citizens. Government has a role in providing those initial rungs on the ladder, I think, for people. The initial rungs of the education, you know, helping folks get the skills they need to get good jobs. I'm very disappointed in the inability of our 4-year colleges to provide a good education for our kids for a reasonable amount of money. You know, even at UNH now, it's becoming almost prohibited for, you know, a regular family to send their children there without those kids taking on a lot of loans. Statistics show that New Hampshire college students are the most indebted in the nation when they get out of college. But the community college, you can go there and get a great vocational education. You can go there and get the first 2 years of college leading to a bachelor's degree for a really reasonable amount of money. I think that when times ease up a little bit, I think that's where we ought to direct the state resources to the community colleges.
Yeah, I agree with you. And in times where the state, the 4-year colleges are raising tuition by 3 to 6% again, I think that's going to make it more difficult. Maybe more people will take advantage of that approach.
I saw a statistic that is just shocking, and I saw it recently enough that I remember it well. If you look at all the 4-year colleges across the country since 1990, while inflation has been 70%, our cost of goods and services are 70% more than they were 20, 21 years ago. 4-year college costs have gone up 300%. And that just shows a lack of discipline. You know, I was out at Franklin Pierce College back in March and talking to a Rotary group who was using one of their facilities, a cafeteria there, early morning meeting. And somebody asked me a question. It turned out to be the president of Franklin Pierce, and I didn't know it at the time. And we were considering some reductions in a scholarship program. I don't know if you remember that. And he said, what do you think about that? And I said, sir, again, not knowing who he was, but I would have given the same answer. I said, clearly I'm uncomfortable with it because I think it's great to help out kids. But, even if it wasn't tough times, I'd consider eliminating money because I think 4-year colleges are doing a real disservice for our children. My hearts go out to these young people that get out of these 4-year colleges with, 30, 40, sometimes over $100,000 worth of debt, and very little in the way of skills that makes them marketable in the workforce. They have the audacity to charge children $30,000 or $40,000 a year, not children, but young people, $30,000 or $40,000 a year to go get a degree in philosophy and all. I mean, the most absurd example I've heard of how out of control our colleges are is that at UNH, my understanding is that we have 5 faculty members in the philosophy department, and 3 years ago we had 3 philosophy majors graduate from UNH. There's just a misordering, a misdirecting of resources there. If it was any other industry, we would all agree that their workers are inefficient, they charge their customers too much, and society is setting the wrong expectations in terms of the need for the service. We don't. All kids don't need to go to college to be successful. We have to start giving that knowledge to kids. You know, I used to work in Europe quite a bit there, and in Germany. There they have great programs where they take young people who go through what amounts to a community college education into apprenticeships, and they get great careers, very fulfilling careers with industry. That's something that would be good for business, good for our people. We have to be more innovative.
I think they do have to get together with the businesses to make sure they're educating the skills, giving them the skills that they need out there. Well, we're going to take a little break now, and we'll come back. We'll talk a little bit about 2012 and the question with redistricting, if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
Okay?
Yeah, great.
Thank you.
Carl.
Okay. Well, here we are back again. Representative Carl Seidel is the host, and our speaker, William OBrien, from our Representatives House. Anyway, now we're going to talk about 2012, Bill, and what we start January 4th with another session.
January 4th and January 5th will be in session. We have the first half of January 4th. We have a few vetoes that we have to address, one on title loans and some other matters. Then we're going to go into the 2012 session later on during the day. And we have, I think the number is 155 retained bills that we have to bring forward and work on over those 2 days, or they'll go into the next week.
Well, retained bills, as many people know, is bills that we kept over from the last session and were refined to hopefully make them more acceptable and effective.
Yeah, I mean, as we've been out of session formally, representatives have been working hard. I was just looking at a bill last night that I got a phone call on, and I saw that the committee had 7 or 8 public sessions and work sessions on this bill, and you know, that's just one of the 155, and so there's been a lot of hard work and recommendations as to whether or not we should pass these bills or whether we should amend them and so forth. And we'll be working on those starting January 4th and going into the 5th. We'll also have a session day on January 11th, and the schedule now is January 18th. The importance of January 18th is we'll probably bring forward some redistricting bills at that point.
Okay, you have a timeline then that's we have to get that done by the end of January.
Well, you know, the timeline is sort of you start with June when the sign-up period for members of the House and other candidates are, and then you start moving your way back from that and saying, well, how long does it take to get things done? One of the things that we have to do in New Hampshire that most people might not be aware of is we have to get any redistricting plans approved by the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice, because we're one of the states that was caught up in their initial testing under the 1965 Civil Rights Act as to those states that, you know, potentially might discriminate against minorities. And there's a long story there, a curious story, but we're one of those states, that takes 60 days, a 60-day review period. We also anticipate, because there's probably nothing more partisan in the world than redistricting, except maybe right to work in legislation, but probably by its nature, nothing more partisan. And so, you know, we have to factor in that, you know, whatever we come up with, because we have a governor from another party, that governor is going to veto it, and so we'll have to factor in how long does it take him to veto it, how long does it take us to get to the veto and override it, hopefully. So you start backing up that, and, you know, obviously the Senate has to do its work on it. We really should be getting it out, you know, middle to, you know, near, certainly before the end of January, and get it over to the Senate.
Well, redistricting not only includes the representatives areas that we had to go through for the the counties.
Oh,
the,
yeah. County commissioners.
Yeah.
We have to redistrict the executive council. We have to redistrict the congressional districts, and obviously the House and the Senate.
Well, so that's quite a big package that's going to go through.
Yeah, and you know, it's a number of those are somewhat easy in the sense, you know, executive council. There's 5 executive council districts. So, you know, to the extent you can come up with variations, and not that many. Congressional districts, there's 2 of those, and you know, so there's not going to be any revolutionary change there, I'm pretty sure. The Senate, 24 districts. They take care of the tradition is the Senate, you know, takes care of it, and we're pretty much, the tradition is in agreement with whatever they do. Same with them, they're in agreement with what the House does. Where it really becomes difficult, Carl, is the House, because we have 400 districts. Even though it's not constitutionally required, we have a tradition of not crossing county lines with House districts. And the reason for that, it just doesn't make sense, because one of the things that representatives do besides go to Concord is they go to their counties and they function in county delegations, which are basically the legislatures for the counties. And so if you had a House district that went over to a county line, you'd have to say, well, what county does that representative go to? And so the tradition is to keep House districts within county lines. But we also have some constitutional guidelines that we have to meet. On the federal level, we have to accommodate 1 person, 1 vote, which means that districts have to be within a reasonable deviation, sort of equal in size. And we also have an amendment we passed in 2006 that requires us to give towns and wards districts to the extent we can based upon their population, and as many as we can based upon their population. In other words, dedicated districts. The only exception being, you know, if we have to meet other constitutional requirements, or if we would deprive other districts of a reasonable number of representatives. And so you can see it begins to get very complicated.
It's a big jigsaw puzzle in a way. We're hoping, I know here in Nashua, that our city clerk has divided up the wards very, very equally.
Right.
And I think he did a very good job. And technically, I think we fit the conditions of having 3 reps in every ward. We hopefully will have that when the whole program's finished.
I know Nashua has been very vocal on that. We're trying our best to accommodate.
But
Nashua. Nashua has a very strong delegation up there, and that's important. You know, we certainly want to respect that. Clearly, if you look at the constitutional amendment, it doesn't tell us to pay attention to cities. It tells us to pay attention to towns and wards. But as a practical matter, we want to respect as much as we can in all instances, the integrity of cities and try to keep their delegations.
Well, the population has shifted a bit in the last 10 years, and that makes it more difficult. And trying to balance the towns, if you can do the towns by themselves and sort of keep the cities a little bit separate just because of their perspective on the legislation that they may have. But the flotorial concept, I think, is something that people don't really understand.
Yeah, and so one of the things that we can do in order to balance out where you have a number of towns or another wards and towns together where you have an odd number of people, that at some point you can say, we just have people left over, what do we do with them? Well, you can float a district over those towns, hence the word flotorial. And that district has to be, certainly in and of itself within a reasonable deviation to satisfy 1 person, 1 vote. But you can basically take these towns where you have had difficulty allocating all their population and use that flotorial to make sure that there's a proportional representation for that town. In Hampshire's, it's another thing that makes it just very difficult. New Hampshire is almost unique in using flotorials. I'm not aware of any other state legislature that uses flotorials to do this. And it's not because we made an election to. It's for 2 reasons. One is that the constitutional amendment in 2006 calls for flotorials to do that. And quite frankly, unless you just had a mathematical division of the state into sort of census blocks and give every block, 32 191 votes, which I
You
think
remember.
which I think is the proportional
Magic
amount.
number, yeah.
Yeah. Then if you're going to try to respect towns and wards, then at that point the only way you can accommodate is through flatorials.
Yeah, well, other states probably divide towns in half and, and
Or they
move
do
them
that.
around. They just do whatever blocks you needed to come to close to your average number.
Right. Now, I mean, the good message is for the people of New Hampshire is that the mathematical difficulties of redistricting the House, accommodating these constitutional requirements, accommodating the tradition of counties, trying to keep cities together where we can, trying to keep flatorials small as we can, means that there's not a lot of opportunity for partisan input there. You know, we can't do what you see in congressional districting in some other states. You know, we have many congressional districts where, they might take a congressional district and run part of it down the median strip of a highway to go pick up another city that's favorable to some incumbent or favorable to one party over the other. We can't do that. We just can't, because you can't be accommodating a town or a ward and keeping its integrity and start, just taking a piece of it.
And changes are hard, no matter what they are. They're hard for people to accept, to understand. So hopefully that's going to be a big selling job as this comes
Well,
up.
it is, but I think we're achieving the spirit of the 2006 amendment, and the way we're doing it, I think if there's no other test, is that there's going to be a lot more districts, which means they're going to be smaller districts, which means that people have an opportunity to know their representatives more.
Better.
Exactly. We've had, districts that had tens of thousands of people in it. It's hard to know your representative, and that's not the New Hampshire tradition. The New Hampshire tradition is your representative is the fellow you see at the post office on Saturday morning, or has coffee down at the coffee house on Wednesday mornings with the folks. He's not anybody other than one of us, no different than a member of the school board or selectman and so forth. And so the way we achieve that is by having as small districts as we can. When the court redistricted after the last attempt back in 2002, it came up with 95 districts. It divided the state up into 95 districts. The court allowed the legislature to redistrict once after that, and so those are the districts we have now. We're at 103 districts. We think we're going to get over 200 districts. And so that should mean that there's going to be a lot more localized representation. It's going to be awkward at times, but I think it's going to be a better arrangement.
It sounds like it, but anyway, it's going to be a difficult picture to explain to the public.
It is, and the public just looks at it and says, what does this town have to do with that town, or this town is in an SAU with this other town, but you redistricted it with the third town, and to the extent you can, you try to redistrict based upon commonality of interests and traditions. But in the end, it becomes very difficult to put this Rubik cube together and make it make sense and to address all this commonality of interests.
Well, what can we go into next? What do you think is another big issue coming up besides the budget, fixing these problems with the budget and redistricting?
Well, I always return to regulatory reform, and we do have some bills coming forward that are going to look more carefully and perhaps reduce licensing. And I know that's difficult for some people. New Hampshire has 144 trades and professions that are licensed. We are way beyond most states. Now, I've heard, and I stand to be corrected on this, but probably only in the exact figure, not in the order of magnitude, that California has 34 trades and professions that are licensed. So there's a substantial difference between us and another state that's viewed as very interventionist when it comes to business. That's not good. That's not good for our people. There's certainly certain professions that we want to make sure they're licensed. I really don't have the ability to figure out who a good neurosurgeon is. I want to make sure that neurosurgeon has some licensing and training, and somebody's looked at them and said, yeah, you can do that kind of activity. There's others that are perhaps less important, and I don't want to offend people, but we all know if you bad massage, you're going to get a bad massage, or I've gone to barbers, maybe recently, who don't give a good haircut, but they they're licensed, and we can figure this out ourselves. It's not a life and death matter.
And it doesn't need the state to regulate that. They could have their own societies or whatever. As a chemist, I belong to American Chemical Society. They had certain criteria, but I didn't have to get licensed.
Right, and so, one of the areas we license folks is landscape architects. Now, that's a perfect area where there could be private certification, and they could proudly say that I've gone to these schools or I've been tested by my association, and this has an association with good reputation, so hire me. Or you go down the street and you see some of the work that the person's done, and you figure out that they are pretty good.
Or different or whatever.
We license athletic, what is it, the agents for athletes, and it's just become, what it amounts to is the economic term is rent. It's increasing the cost of the services. It's putting obstacles in the way of entry into those professions, which increase the cost of the services, and it's just not necessary.
Again, another way of making sure the economy can grow without too much.
And again, it does that exactly. It does that exactly. One of the the thing that I held in highest esteem that I saw over the years was a neighbor of mine who lost his job. And he tried for a while. He was an engineer, transportation engineer, and he'd been working on roads. He couldn't get a job, and he was about 50 years old. So finally what he did was he put a trailer on the back of his car, got a couple of lawnmowers, and went around and started mowing people's lawn. At this point, that fellow has a company that employs 20 people. Now, if you had to go get a license to be someone to mow someone's lawn, then he couldn't have done that, because then it would have taken investment to do it, and time to do it. And he wouldn't have been able to just say, I can't have my family run out of food, and we have to make the mortgage payment, and I'm going to do that now. We have to have an economy that has that kind of flexibility to allow someone like my friend to do what is necessary, rather than having a hidebound economy that says, no, you can't do anything like that.
Yeah, I have a friend who's an engineer who wound up running a handyman's operation, but starting the same way that your example started.
Right.
Just starting word of mouth and carrying on fairly well. What about the roads and highways and stuff? We did a pretty hard job on them, on the Department of Transportation, as far as cutting them back, and we are looking to keep up our roads and highways.
I was at a meeting last night, and someone asked this exact question, and it's a difficult one, because we have not increased the gas tax for many years. It's at 17 cents a gallon now, and that 17 cents a gallon when cars were less efficient and using more gallons of gas was more meaningful. And when inflation was lower, it was meaningful. At some point, we're going to have to look at how we fund our roads. I would like to see us, and probably we're not going to have an opportunity to do it this term, but as we go into the next term, to do two things when it comes to our highway funding. One is to take a look at where the money that we collect now goes, because we have our murder investigation unit paid out of the highway fund. Now, the service is invaluable. That's the truck that pulls up and they put yellow tape around and all that. And they do valuable work. Obviously they're highly necessary. Out of the highway fund, it just doesn't make sense. So we have to start looking at. And I've heard a good 20% to a third of it goes to functions that have nothing to do with keeping bridges from falling down.
That's right. Yeah.
So we really have to start, I think, tightening up where that money goes, which is going to help. And then we just have to start to look at how we finance our roads. And in the days where we have Priuses going around getting 50 or 60 miles per gallon, we have smaller cars and more efficient cars. We have higher costs to repair our roads. That's one area that even those of us who are fiscally conservative have to say, that is a function of government, is to keep our infrastructure going. And so we're going to have to look at that.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm not sure what the solution is, but you don't want it. You try not to increase taxes, but maybe the users have to pay something
Right.
To improve that. But the infrastructure to the state is very, very
And I think that is a good way of looking at it. Or, rather than say, let's go increase taxes, let's look at ways that we can take identify the users and have users pay for the cost to public assets.
Yeah, the turnpike system is one way we have of controlling that, and that seems to work out well, but you can't do that completely in the entire state.
You can't, and the turnpike system is somewhat inefficient. It's difficult to get out of the Turnpike Authority what the cost of collection is, but I've heard that it might be around 40%. So I get uncomfortable with a business where it's the accounts receivable department is basically 40% of the cost of doing business.
So that is one of the things with some of that automatic toll, the easy pass type of thing is what I think all the other states are doing.
Right.
Quite a bit, and there are plans, of course, having a high-speed transition for that going through the toll booths.
Yeah, which means you basically don't have to leave the highway.
And you don't have the people to collect it.
Yeah, and so I think that is one of the areas that I think a lot of us would be comfortable in saying, look, if you're going to use the road, and you're going to wear out the road, then you got to pay for the road. If I don't choose to use the road, then for me, I shouldn't pay. And so I think that's a legitimate difference between paying a user fee and a tax.
Well, Bill, I think we're just about finished with this. Any last comments that you'd like to make to our audience in Nashua?
Oh, I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you. I think that whatever we do in redistricting Nashua will be very, very pleased with it. It's a good plan from Nashua's point of view. It's developing very well. And at some point when I come back, and I'm glad we don't have the time now to talk about it, we can talk about trains.
Oh, all right, we'll do that. I'm sure that'll be part of the discussion in the future. And we do want to have you back later on in the session as we catch maybe halfway through.
Yeah, that'd be a good idea. We can tell you where we've gone up to that point and how we're going to close it out.
I did want to ask you, too, one more last question. What do you think of our Republican primary?
I am endorsing a candidate. I'm endorsing Newt Gingrich. I very much respect Speaker Gingrich for his intelligence, for his conservative philosophy, for his achievement over the years, for his ability to articulate and present our party's philosophy to the people of this country. I think he will be a great presidential candidate. I truly hope he gets the nomination because Barack Obama can't stand up to a Newt Gingrich in terms of intelligence and in terms of obvious love for the country. Newt Gingrich just has it all over that guy. It'll be a great presidency and it'll be a winning candidacy.
Well, glad to hear that. It's interesting. There are a lot of us Republicans are split among a number of very good candidates.
You know, one of the things I want to say, because you're absolutely right, in my leadership team up at the House, there are members who go, pretty much in every direction you could go on this. And one of the things that I think we have to understand is as we look at who we're going to support, who we're going to endorse, it's not abandonment of principles. It's not even different principles we have. What we're trying to do is to look into essentially a crystal ball and say, what is going to go on in the future? Which candidate is electable? Which candidate will have a good presidency? And there's a lot of guesswork involved in that. And it doesn't mean that because I can't even remember if you're supporting someone, Carl. But if we don't agree, it doesn't mean that we're not supporters of each other. We don't have the same goals. It just means we see that vision differently.
And yes, I am supporting Mitt Romney, and our co-host is supporting Rick Perry. So, we have, as I said, a number of different points. I think all the candidates have something to offer, and hopefully whoever we choose will replace the president we have now.
There is one certainty, and there's one thing that I know we all agree on, that any one of these candidates would be 1,000% better than Barack Obama. That man has to get out of the White House.
Right. I think people are beginning to realize that, too. Well, thank you again, Bill.
No, thank you.
Nice talking to you.
Nice talking to you, Carl.